Supportables week 14 was actually quite electric, and I kind of wish there was more at stake because there was a lot of really interesting matchups, some players who just went off, and it really came down to whether you had them or whether you were facing them. And I think a few more than in previous weeks, but realistically for us, yes, the seeding mattered and where people finished, but this was definitely a week where you were really only paying attention to two matchups. One, Kelsey wins and she's in. If not, and if Jackie wins, she's in. We knew early and often, though, on this one because a few of those previously mentioned explosive players came up. But I think after the Sunday Nighter, this one was pretty much done, and we all knew it. Anyway, if we want to just stop talking in the hypotheticals, let's actually get on to talking a little bit about the week, and then even more importantly, let's get to our fantasy scores. This is normally when I go to my notes and I pick a couple things that I thought were interesting from the week, and then a few pictures magically appear to my left or to my right up here, and then I go on and talk about our fantasy leagues. And if I'm saying this, it's because this is going to be a little bit different. Now, this was a huge week for fantasy, but if you like football, it was actually a fairly monstrous week for football as well. A couple teams clinched at least a playoff berth, which again is going to have a knock-on effect eventually with our fantasy leagues. I could talk a little bit more about some of like the Bills game was great. If you had someone in there that, well, not their defenses, but Allen obviously took off. If you had any of the Rams receivers, they obviously scored big for you. Even in the last little bit there, if you had either Cincinnati or Dallas people or you were against them, that was probably a big deal. If you had or were going against one of the Minnesota receivers, that was a big deal. But again, it's not just an NFL story there. I'm really linking it back to our fantasy leagues. And so this is the point in the season when I take a pause because I'm still going to be writing these things down. But just like last year, for those who were in these leagues last year, I'm going to save a lot of these thoughts and some of the bigger perspective ones that happened over the whole season for kind of a post-fantasy football bigger video for all leagues. At this point, I'm going in and just focusing on league by league, not doing a big NFL breakdown because let's be honest, I know a lot of you out there have favorite teams. Right now, you're following them religiously and you're not going to me for your favorite team's needs. This is really just a fantasy bump, and now that we're getting into the playoffs, that's all I'm going to focus on. Also, reason number 2, tomorrow, I'm filming this a day early than I normally do because tomorrow's a really big day at my work. Apparently, I'm going to run around and make a lot of noise. And then Friday, leaving on a jet plane. So the next video is going to be awkwardly made, hopefully not in a whisper in my parents' place. The following video after that is going to be even weirder because it's right by Christmas and we have about a day or two window in between games. And then after the finals, it's either going to happen a little bit later or it's going to be in a weird spot while I'm on travel. So it also helps not doing this little part of it as well to see if I can get them out on time. So there you have it. There's my reasoning. But don't worry, you will hear much, much more from me near the end of the season. But now, as I mentioned, let's go on to last week's results, defining our playoffs, and then we'll sneak ahead and take a look at some preview of this week's matchups. We knew most of this week didn't necessarily matter in terms of the standings. There were some other things to pay attention to, but we'll get to that in a little while. But Kelsey, we knew you had complete control. Win and you were in, lose and you were leaving the door open. And not only did you have an emphatic win against our number 1 overall seed, you had the most points scored. Crazily enough, the other person that you probably were paying attention to, because had you lost and they won, you were out, was our number 2 highest scoring on the week. But we'll get to her in a minute. For you, you had a reasonably decent performance, a few under, a few over. Your tight end actually was the tight end too. This was battle of the tight ends though. These were the top 2. Jules and Laura, you had Kittle at 1, Joku at 2 here, Kelsey. But realistically, the 2 standouts in most weeks, 37 and change for a wide receiver would probably be number 1. This week, because we had some explosive wide receiver play, it was wide receiver 3, but realistically, you had the greatest quarterback performance in a while, possibly in a long time, or ever, at least in fantasy kind of terms. 3 rushing touchdowns is massive. 3 throwing, not too shabby, over 300 yards. So the 56 plus definitely helped out. Pretty much took it away, and as soon as anyone was watching, you knew this was a foregone conclusion. For Jules and Laura, you got a lot of flack for kind of laying low this week. I don't think you necessarily laid low. I think we were all just trying to goat you into making sure you did your best here, but you certainly did, and obviously you played some high-end but low-floor people like Westbrook Akine. He was on a touchdown streak just recently and obviously didn't have a great game. Your defense let you down is an understatement. Now, your kicker was the kicker 3, and like I said, you had your tight end performance, so all is not lost. You're going to have a bye week to kind of dust yourself off, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But Kelsey, not only did you get there, not only did you get a playoff spot, but you did it so emphatically, you actually jumped up to the number 5 seed, which is going to come into play when we talk about matchups. So congrats, Kelsey. You needed to win. You did win. You're in the playoffs. Jax, this kind of sucks because 162, you should be the top scorer in most weeks. But even more importantly, if you look at the number of points you scored this year, I think, and we'll check in a minute, you're probably in the top 6. You probably did deserve it, but fantasy football doesn't always go to those who deserve. You did have some outstanding performances. You had the quarterback 2 and Sam Darnold next to obviously Kelsey's 1, so you're just behind there. Williams was the running back 5, so that certainly helps you out. But weirdly enough, you also had the kind of defense staple. No one else had a defense in the top 5, and you had the only 2. Sam Fram was the number 1. Pittsburgh was the number 3, so you couldn't really go wrong there. You did have the waiver wire pickup of the week. You did have the revolving door, as it seems, for San Francisco running backs, and he was the running back 2, but he was on your bench. Randy, on your side, you also kind of helped out Jackie. The wide receiver 5 was on your bench, but it's okay because you started the wide receiver 1 in Jamar Chase. I had mentioned some of the explosive performances. He was certainly one of them. Randy, 140 is nothing to sneeze at. You certainly didn't roll over and play dead on this one. You fought Jackie to the end, but unfortunately for Jackie, you're not going to make the playoffs. You are going to be the queen of the consolation right now, and heading in, you're going to have some favorable matchups, but we'll talk about that in future weeks. Randy, you knew you were going to make the playoffs. It's just a matter of what position, so now you're number 4, and you're going to know what that means in a minute. Quite a big weekend in the Lang household because they both clinched the number 1 and number 2. Paul, or Cerberus, and the Raw Doggers here, you got the number 2 seed. Pretty fantastic. That does mean that you get a bye for next week. You don't have to pay attention, and you just dance into the semifinals. Certainly an upgrade from the Paul that we knew last year, so perhaps the other 2 heads on that dog were certainly helping you out this year. So congratulations, you get the bye, you're in the playoffs. For me, not the greatest of weeks. I did overachieve a little bit in terms of my predicted, but I nailed my spot. I thought maybe a 5 or a 6. It doesn't really matter in this case. It just comes down to who you're going to play, so it definitely will matter next week. Just to get through some of the numbers here, though, Paul, you did have the quarterback 5 in Hurts. You also had the wide receiver 2 in Addison, one of the explosive performances I was talking about. The running back 5, which was pretty decent. Sorry, not running back 5. I mean running back 3 in Jacobs and defense 3 in New Orleans. Your bench was relatively decent in picks. You didn't have a whole lot of depth there, although we can see here already you're probably going to be talking about the fact that I did bench the running back 1. Would not have saved me. And if you look at my running backs, they were certainly not my problem. In fact, I didn't necessarily have too many problems. I'd say my quarterbacks were the biggest one. Both of them underperformed. My kicker and defense didn't go off. I just didn't really have an electric performance. And to get 160, you need to have a few more players pop off. But either way, Raw Doggers, you got your bye. I got my playoff spot. This one's an interesting one because normally I do finish with the low score, and Pamela was the low score. But remember, Pamela's also done it enough that she's now that dead point, so she's already had her dead week. We now go to the next lowest for rounds, which is going to come up next. This was a grudge battle, you could tell. No one wants to finish on a loss, but as we know and as we found out, both of you are in the consolation side, and we will talk about that in a minute. You know what that means, though, if you've been paying attention to the group chat. There was some decent performances here. Both of you were, around your predicteds for the majority of it. However, Kate and Nick, you did have a little pride here. Jefferson was the wide receiver 3. White was the running back 4. And you actually had the top scoring kicker in the new Kansas City guy who's come in the last few weeks and done quite well. So overall, a great performance, well over your predicted. Pamela, you were just under, but realistically, slim pickings here hurt you. He literally didn't play at the last minute, but he was pulled before the start. And then Barkley has been kind of your go-to this year, and he really just didn't have a phenomenal performance. Your quarterbacks did fine, though, and there's a lot to kind of celebrate in that regard. But you're going to have to get your stuff together and not drop all of your players. I also should mention, the tight end 4 was on your bench, so that would have been somewhat helpful, but not enough to really come back to it. So now that you know you're not dropping your players, and hopefully you know why, we can look ahead to future matchups, because you might just see each other again sometime soon. Raf and James, not the game you were hoping to play, but you at least finished the regular season on a win, cementing an 8 seed, which again comes up in the consolation side, although that wasn't really too much in doubt. You just had one of those standard, everyone did all right. In fact, your flexes down here did quite well over predicted. But realistically, your only person that scratched the top 5 or rang the bell was your kicker at the kicker 5. On the flip side, we had a couple of quarterback situations here with Hale and Vincent, the fourth and the Conkers here. Burrow had a really big last day, making it probably worth your while to watch that Monday nighter. And Tua, that was on your bench, was actually the quarterback 4, so it was 3 and 4 respectively. Unfortunately for you, you had a massive underperformance with your running backs, including Bucky, who got hurt halfway through, and even a big Monday nighter with Cincinnati and Dallas firing back and forth wasn't enough to save it. So 117 is normally not it, but you almost made it through the regular season without having to buy a round, but Week 14 came up and bit you. You'll be buying us one at some point in time, which we'll be talking about a little bit more because we all owe a bunch. We've only had a few paid off, but that's something to work on as we go forward. So anyway, that's kind of our playoff picture, but let's jump quickly to how the league finished, and then we'll get to some matchups. As I said, there was some shuffling of the decks, and technically we had a 3-way tie for 4th, but the points weren't that close to really throw too many things off. We certainly had a clear top 2. They were by a game or so I think a few kind of stories moving into it. We have a lot of parity in the middle. Clearly a couple of 2 people, but they're in very different paths. Jules and Lara were dominant at the beginning and have kind of been dropping the ball the last couple weeks, whereas the Raw Doggers have a 9-game win streak coming in on a heater. They get the week off, and the Lang household can regroup collectively and wait for the semifinals. As for the rest of us, we got a few other things to take care of. Now, we look at the schedule, the playoff picture here. This is the one side, so if you notice, if we go to the consolation, this came up in the chat. So you jump ahead to the following week, so they have no one playing this particular week. You will all play in the following week, and that's when things will kind of break down for you. You'll have 2 here, and remember, the winner gets to finish. Do remember, there's only 2 teams that finish by winning their last 2 games, and that is the champion and the consolation champion. I know we were making fun of it, and it does not ring the bell for any prizes, but pride of winning the last 2, that's what it's on the line. But realistically, you want to win next week because you stay out of the tub thumping game. But we'll get to that when we preview next week's matchups. This week, we only have 2 games a-going, so we're going to take a look at each of them. In our 4 versus 5 semifinal, right now it's broken down to a near 50-50 at this stage, although there might be some shuffling of the decks. There might be a few people moving things around last minute. One of the nice things about this matchup that I'm really noticing, though, we've got a few keys here and a few teams or a few things that I think will kind of set it off. But realistically, we're going to know early, the Thursday nighter, it's a battle of our wide receivers and some of our key players, right? We've got a flex down here in Jennings, Kupp and Nakua getting after it. So already we're going into the weekend, we're going to see who's up and who's down. I think if we look at our big players, and that's what's really going to probably decide this for Kelsey, she's almost been unbeatable when her running backs go off and when Allen is solid. Her other quarterback, I'm assuming she goes Caleb, but she has another rookie on the bench. Don't know if she's going to feel spicy in making that decision. On the flip side, we got the battle of the B. Robinsons. But if you look at Randy's wide receivers, I think here is where you get the most of her punching power. When Chase goes off and Kupp has those big weeks, she's quite a team that can put up a ton of points. And obviously getting Daniels, the rookie quarterback, who kind of needs to redeem himself after a few fuzzy weeks in a row. He had a great last start, but him in New Orleans could be the recipe for success here. A couple of defenses, I definitely give the advantage from one side over the other. Philadelphia might have a problem with Pittsburgh, but then again, they might not. And I would be shocked if Baltimore has a problem with the Giants. So I agree here, coming down to the near 50-50 coin toss, this one should be good. But like I said, check back in after the Thursday nighter because we're already going to see who's in the lead. Super difficult for me to be unbiased on this one. It is a 50-50, but not quite like the last one. I am a little down here, and honestly, I think a lot of it comes down to a few kind of key players. I think I would give the quarterback edge to him. I have been having some struggles there. Running backs as a whole, I can hold my own, but let's be honest, Henry has had some weeks where he's gone out and won it himself. I am insanely nervous about him against the Giants. I think he could run all day because even if they get the lead, Baltimore has shown they don't really care. They will keep giving him the ball. I got to hope for a big game for Justice Hill or for Lamar to do something special. I don't think the Giants have the people to stop him, so that could be trouble. Now, Burrow and Lamb have gone off, and these are great matchups for him. So I think this is one of those key points where I'm liking my running backs. I like my team. I do have some decisions to make at wide receiver. Possibly as well at quarterback. We'll see how spicy I'm feeling or what I need to do to mix things up. But realistically, one of the biggest things I think that I have a disadvantage on this one is my matchups are not quite as good. But you got to suck it up. It's the playoffs, so no excuses. It's close enough. Both matchups could, in theory, come down to the last few games. With the end of 14, now comes the end of our regular season, but on to the fun part, we're getting on to the playoffs. A lot of questions kind of came out of the chat, but yes, there is a consolation. Yes, they all have a bye, so they go straight to the consolation semis. And yes, there actually is something on the line for the losers. If you were not there for the tub thumping last year, we still do have the video probably kicking around. Jackie set a pretty high bar, which I know she doesn't want to have to try and top again this year, so that's going to be competitive. On the winner's side, we know the Lang household's taken this week off and going straight to the semis, while the rest of the people playing the playoffs, I already went over the two epic matchups. So lots to look at, lots to still cheer about, but for a lot of us, it is the week off. So start making some moves, thinking proactively, whereas the people that have to win to get in the semis, I'd say best of luck, but I really only care about me on this one. I can't even fake it. Enjoy the week though, folks.